I would tell the kids, you're not a teenager, you're a young adult. And that was to help do, I think, a couple of things: raise the bar of expectation for them, but also help them to see that there's this modern category that we don't necessarily have to accept.
Mm-hmm.
That there's this stage now between being a little child. Now there's this thing called adolescence, or being a teen. And it comes with a set of cultural expectations. And we wanted to fight against that, because what we see in the culture is low expectations for kids and for teenagers. Erin, an opening reflection question for you as a parent.
Oh, great.
We have 5 kids.
Mm-hmm.
We have launched 3 out of those 5 kids. How many of those kids who have launched have failed? Or have they actually launched? Has there been a failure to launch? And of those kids that have actually launched, how many have crashed and burned? I would just want to be real and authentic with our audience. We are not perfect parents.
No.
And all 3 of those kids have crashed and burned. No.
That's so sad. No, that's not true. And actually, I've been thinking about this question or this topic of launching kids, because we're about to launch our 4th one. And I thought that this would get easier. And it turns out that it has not. What? Is it easy for you? Yeah, we are very different. This is true.
Well, and men and women are very different.
This is true. And you and I are very different.
And we are very different.
The other day, one of the kids said something about, well, don't feel guilty, and I don't want Dad to feel guilty. And I said, honey, it's not possible for Dad to feel guilty. He doesn't even have that gauge in his heart. And we had a good laugh at your expense.
I have it. I just don't do anything that I should appropriately feel guilty for.
My word.
Okay.
Oh, gosh.
And you're on the other end of that spectrum.
Yes, I feel guilty about everything.
You probably just feel guilty right now for sharing that story and publicly shaming me.
Oh, no. Actually, when it comes to you, I don't feel a lot of guilt. It's just
Yes,
mostly with our children.
Oh, come on. That's not true, honey.
Okay, maybe a little bit. But compared to guilt with our children, it's like not even close.
You know, now you should feel guilty for deceiving our audience.
It's not even close.
You should feel guilty for deceiving our audience.
Well, it's true. We're not perfect parents. We're very different. And we're still in this thing of just this weekend. I was leaving our almost kid we're about to launch.
Details out there on the table. This kid is...
Oh, I thought you were going to say her name.
No, I was going to say this kid is 17 years old. I'm not going to share the name, though.
Okay, anyway, so I was leaving somewhere to go somewhere else that I needed to go, but I was feeling guilty about it. And so I called you and I was like, should I just stay? And I'm feeling bad. And
well, it was a speech and debate tournament.
You gave me the whole, she's 17 years old. You don't need to coddle her. Da, 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 da. And I was like, but I want to coddle her. No, but I didn't want to leave. I was feeling torn. And you were like, no, you need to go to this other thing. Go enjoy yourself. Don't feel guilty. So,
well, now let's pause here, because I want to address the tone in which you mimicked me right there.
I thought it sounded exactly like how you talked.
But okay, in hindsight, what's your assessment of my advice there? In that situation,
it crashed and burned because I missed a very important thing. I missed the award ceremony that happened, and our daughter got this huge award, and I missed it. And when I found out, then the people I was with at the other thing I left for, I was like, you guys, this is what just happened. And then I go, Mom of the Year moment. And they all felt bad for me and probably were like, yeah, this was a loser mom moment for you, Erin.
No, they didn't
So
think
your
that.
advice crashed and burned,
No,
if we want to be honest.
First of all, it wasn't my advice. It was my assessment of the situation because you had already left and
I was
and
driving
you
away.
could not,
I could have turned
you
around.
could not have foreseen that the child would have won the tournament. And and so they're just decisions you got to make, and you had other commitments that you're balancing. So anyway, okay,
It hurts talking about it. Why are we here?
You know what?
Because we're talking about launching adults,
yeah.
and she is almost 18, and she's about to graduate high school
Yes.
and move on.
And obviously, we need to work on more stuff in counseling. Okay, so
and I'm grieving launching another kid. This is how we started it, because I was saying I thought I would get better at it.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure I am.
Well, and let's be, I guess, honest here. It's not easy for me either. In fact, the last conversation I had with my next kid who's launching brought me to tears thinking about it. So I'm not a heartless, cruel father.
No.
And I have actually thought, we're down to 2, and there's a bitter sweetness to that. And this is a question that whether you have a 2-year-old or a 20-year-old, I want to encourage everyone out there to be thinking about this. You want to think about parenting young adults, launching young adults, and this kind of maybe an in-between stage of their childhood, adolescence, and now married and have kids or career or whatever. We all need to be thinking about this. And thinking about it now. If you've got the 2-year-old, you want to be thinking about this, because if you're not intentional and you don't have kind of an idea in mind of what you'd like to see and some healthy goals, you may find yourself slipping into a situation that you didn't intend, but now you're in the middle of, and you're seeing the unhealth of it. And
Yes.
I just had a recent conversation with a couple of parents who have a early 20s child. No, it was mid-20s child living at home. I think their son was 24.
Not a child, but I get what you're saying.
Yes, child in relation
I
to
know
parents.
it's hard to, because we don't view 20
It's their kid
as children. Yeah,
it's their kid, but 24 years old living at home. And these parents were coming to me for some advice at this event I was speaking at, and it really had to do with a failure to launch. Son still living at home. He's not working full time, not going to school full time. They're wrestling with how do we help him mature? And they're seeing now at 24 that he's lacking the maturity that they think he ought to have at this stage of life. There's a lack of taking responsibility. There are house rules that he doesn't want to get in line with. There are requirements, contributing financially or paying rent that they haven't implemented, and they're concerned about his future and the trajectory of his life. But he's 24 now. And there are things that they, I think, realized that they missed early on that they didn't do to get, and now they're finding themselves in the situation, and now it's much more urgent. It comes with a lot more emotional, what do you call it? Struggle. I mean, now they're really struggling with it. And they're also not on the same page. It's a messy situation for them. And of course, we would always affirm we're never without hope. The Lord works through those situations. And sometimes that's where he works most, is in the struggle. But we think there are things that you can do to prepare your kids for this stage of life. And there's going to be some challenges here because sometimes, early 20s, they're still living at home. A lot of kids are still living at home in their early 20s. And even kids that go away to university come back for the summers or for breaks. And then when they graduate, they come back and they're at home full time. And so now you've got this young adult, and there's this transition period that maybe you've never talked about things in this transition period. You haven't been explicit in having conversations with them, and expectations are a little bit vague and ambiguous. But then there's a sense of, I think for a lot of parents, maybe there might be some guilt. There may be some fear in wanting to bring up certain things because you don't want to kind of hurt the relationship. It's a difficult period to navigate. And so I wanted to bring you on the podcast, Erin, to answer this question. So take it away, because this one's difficult.
It's funny, as you're talking about preparing them to basically launch what we're talking about, to go out and be on their own. And I think it's preparing them and us for this launching. So as a parent, you're thinking of, like we've talked about a lot on podcasts, like having the end in mind when they're young. And so you're preparing them, but you also need to be realistic that you are preparing yourself too. Mm. And this is where, of course, as a parent, what is required of us when they are little is much more hands-on. We're making decisions for them. We're doing everything for them. But then this is this dance that we do as they get older and are capable of doing more things, that we start to let go of those things and let them do things. And so this is where the motto that we've talked about, that we have in our home, is don't do for your kids what they can do for themselves. And this has been our motto. So what a 2-year-old can do for themselves isn't a lot. It's pretty limited. But they can learn to get themselves dressed and slip on their shoes and help clear their plate after a meal. Little things. So you don't do for them what they can do for themselves.
Yeah. Now you've added the second part to that motto.
I did?
Yeah. Remember, don't do for your kids what they can do for themselves. And if they can't do it for themselves, then it doesn't get done. Isn't that the second part that you added?
Then it just gets dropped.
Yeah. So if they can't feed themselves, oh, well, they go hungry.
Because eventually they'll learn. No. So, and this is why it's what they can do for themselves. So it's a realistic picture of what they can do. But what we know from studies of modern parenting and this next generation, Gen Z, is that parents are hanging on way too long to doing for their kids what their kids can do for themselves. And so statistically, there's so many things I could mention, but like 18 to 25-year-olds and the amount of parents that it's like 70, there's this one study I read. I think it was in USA Today that I read it. This was a couple years ago, but it was like 76% of parents are still calling their children, I'm saying children in quotes because these are 18 to 25-year-olds, to wake them up for class or work.
Did you say 76?
Yeah, it was like had called or
had called, not
like within that year, they had called to wake them up for a class or work or something like that. And then there was, I forget how many percentage were still making doctor's appointments and dentist appointments for their quote unquote children who are not children, but adults. And so these are things, of course, that are completely appropriate when your kids are little. But by the time they're junior high, high school, are we stopping to do for our kids what they can do for themselves so that we are preparing to let go and they are prepared to fly the nest because they are seeing in themselves, oh, I have the ability to take care of myself.
Okay, let me pause here because I just wrote down two thoughts, two potential pitfalls or obstacles here to
Okay.
this idea of, launching our kids, helping them become adults. Number one would be our emotional dependence on our kids. So an unhealthy dependence, like I do all these things for my kids, I nurture them, I take care of them, and it feeds me in a way that I feel good about it, or
I'm needed.
or I'm needed. And I think it not just I don't feel good about it, but there's this unhealthy sense of I'm needed. And that, it seems like, can be a big potential pitfall for a lot of
Absolutely.
parents, because then they will act out of that primarily. And so then at 23, 24, 26, 27, they're still providing things for their kids that really their kids should have taken on themselves. And they do it maybe even well-intentioned, right? But there's,
I think it's always, I think the intention is probably always good. Like,
yeah, because you're
I'll
not,
just keep doing,
yeah,
you
you're
just
not
keep doing
thinking,
things.
oh, I have this overdependence on them and it's feeding my need, right?
I
But
want to handicap them in some way so they can't do these things. That's not, I mean, just be charitable. We should be charitable and know, like, this is not what parents are doing. They're not like,
yeah,
how could I harm my child?
yeah. And at the same time, it's not enough to say, well, I'm well-intentioned,
Right.
and to let ourselves off the hook
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
And now this is where, I mean, this would be another side discussion to this, but talking about the health of our marriages is an important conversation here, because sometimes it could be that there are some serious deficiencies in the health of the marriage relationship, such that one or the other parent or both parents then look to have some of those needs met in their kids.
Yeah.
And that could be mom or dad. And so that's something to be aware of in this conversation that might handicap our abilities to help our kids become adults and launch them.
Yeah. And you think about blended families and how this will create another obstacle, because oftentimes, mom and dad are split. And so coming together and having the same goals and it becomes even more of a challenge. And so sometimes it's, well, I want to do what this other parent's doing this, so I should keep doing this too. I mean, there's all kinds of ways.
Single parents, right? Single parents, this could be a challenge for you.
Yeah.
And this is where, a single parent, it's so vital for you to be plugged into a good, healthy local church where you are having other adults building into you, and older Christians who are mentoring you and coaching you, and and some of that relational need is met.
Yeah.
So that's one pitfall. I think here's a second one is, you've got this surrounding culture that we live in that has low expectations. And so there's probably a lot of parents around us that, hey, it's no problem if I'm still completely supporting my kid financially when they're 22, 23, 24 and living at home. And I'm not going to push them, quote unquote, out of the nest.
Yeah.
I'm not going to force them, to do things that are uncomfortable. And a lot of parents take that approach around us, and it just, there's this general lowering of expectations because of that, because now this is just the norm.
Everyone else is doing it. Yes. I mean, we have definitely, don't you think? I mean, this is something we have definitely encountered as we have tried to launch our kids, have them detach from us and go. And we are not the norm a lot of times, as far as making kids, young adults, start to pay all their bills and be responsible for themselves completely.
Hmm.
And even if there is a time where they're in school or whatever, like you said, there's lots of scenarios now. And of course, a lot of the conversation today is, well, everything is so more expensive now. It is harder for kids to launch out on their own. Fair enough. But what we have found is that it's not just like, oh, they're too young to buy a house. It's like parents are still paying cell phone bills, car insurance, everything for a child who's not a child anymore, who's an adult and more than capable of taking care of themselves.
And I think we would say we have tried to raise the bar of expectations for our kids. And not in like an oppressive way, or not in a way that is so burdensome. But what has come back, some of the feedback we've gotten from the kids, is that they've actually appreciated it. And so, for instance, something like the work ethic. I mean, that's been a big thing in our home. Is you work hard, you develop a work ethic. You take care of yourself.
You contribute to the family.
You contribute to the family.
Mm-hmm.
All these kinds of things have been part of the culture of our family, and and our kids have mentioned even how, in contrast to their peers, they've seen the different expectations.
Mm-hmm.
But as they've gotten older, there's also been a thankfulness for it. And I want to get that out there, because it's the kind of thing where, and when we talk about this concept a lot on the podcast, as a parent, you're often sowing, and some of the reaping doesn't come till down the line.
Mm-hmm.
And I think on this, developing responsibility, taking care of yourself, considering others, all that good stuff, becoming an adult, there's just a lot of sowing, and some of the reaping won't be reaped till later on, right? Some of that fruit doesn't get harvested till later on.
Mm-hmm.
But we've been able to see in our kids a thankfulness, even to where the kids have expressed a thankfulness for the work ethic we instilled in them.
Which I almost fall out of my chair when that happens, when our adult kids, when they like utter the words, "We're so glad you guys made us do chores." You're just like, you're going to fall out of your chair because you're thinking, do you know how much battling I had to do with you? But it's true. And especially I think with this generation, this young generation now, where there is a lot more attention to self, and work ethic is all about you. So it's like, if you don't want to show up for work early, then you're not going to show up for work.
Yeah.
Everything's about you. That they are noticing what is normal for other people their age. They don't see that as normal.
Yeah. And so you're setting up your kid, you're preparing them, is a better way to put it, for some healthy success.
Yes.
And you can see your kid then have some success in their work life, and have a healthy sense of pride in that, like as they excel and as they do well. And of course, ultimately glorify God by doing excellent work. I was thinking about this past weekend. I didn't share this with you yet.
Uh-oh. If I had $1 for every time you said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you this." And then I always joke, for a professional communicator, sometimes you don't communicate too well, Kunkel. Okay, what'd you forget to tell me?
I admit I probably deserve those comments, honey. Let me humble myself before you right now.
Okay, what'd you forget to tell me?
Well, our 13-year-old, and I won't identify if it's a boy or a girl. We'll just use they, them pronouns. They had a friend over, and then asked if they could walk down the street, a few blocks to the local strip mall where there were some places to eat. They wanted to get some food. And so they and their friend went down there.
You let them go?
I did. Of course, I let them go.
Just kidding. You didn't drive them? You
I
made
didn't-
them walk?
I made them walk. I mean, it probably was a good, 5 football fields away. And, but they went down, came back, and then I was like, oh, what'd you guys do? And they went to a restaurant and got food, and then went to a place called Jamba Juice and got a smoothie. And then our 13-year-old talked about how they paid for it all. And I was like, oh, how come you didn't ask me for any money? And
He
said, okay, yeah, you just exposed who it is. We're trying to keep our kids anonymous here. But anyway, he said that, he's like, oh, well, I had money, and so I just paid for it. It didn't even occur to him to say like, hey, Dad, can I have money for it? And there was, it was kind of a proud moment. Like, oh, he's been working hard and he's earned some decent money. And it was like, I'm going to take care of not just me, but also my buddy.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like one of those rare parent wins that we've had recently. But it was a proud moment. And it was good for him. It was just good that he had that view. There was a lack of selfishness there.
Mm-hmm.
But there was also, I think, a healthy sense of pride in him of
being able to do that.
Yeah, being able to do that. So there's just, again, thinking about the goods is maybe sometimes it helps to motivate us, right? And thinking about the future, having young adult, maybe who's still in our home, that's probably the trickiest scenario is, okay, now they're 22, 23, and they're 18, 19, and they're still in the home. How do we navigate this? So, okay, so let's see, where do we start here? I think number one, making sure that we're clear, and I don't know, this might just be obvious, but we're clear that there's a distinction between kids and adults. It might sound obvious, but it is something that is just explicit in Scripture. And I thought we'd hit maybe just 2 passages on this. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11. 1 Corinthians 13, 11, which says this. I'm trying to find it. I'm trying to delay as I find it. Here it is, 1 Corinthians 13, 11. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. So it's clear the Bible kind of assumes this distinction between children and adult, and that there are ways that are consistent, ways that you act that are consistent with being a child, and ways that you act and speak and reason that are consistent with being an adult. Then you've got, let's see, this second passage is 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 22. It says this, so flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace. And so there's a distinction there. Okay, there are youthful passions, and then here's what you should pursue. I think implicit in that is, all right, these are for adults. This is for those who are mature, who are grown up. So the Bible clearly accepts a distinction between kid and child, and there's adulthood. The Bible doesn't lay out a clear description of what that is, what that looks like. I think there's a lot we can draw from the Scriptures in terms of what spiritual maturity is, and that would inform how we think about what it means to be an adult.
Yeah, and you think about how many cultures and times have seen this different. You think about a Jewish culture, the bar mitzvah is like, now the young person is like, welcome to adulthood, like you are becoming a young adult. the quinceañera is in Hispanic culture, that's this like ceremony of now you are kind of launching into adulthood and you're no longer a child, basically, in both of those. But and different times in different places, we could think of all kinds of examples of when the child is no longer thought of as a child. And like you brought up, in our culture, this extended childhood, the fact that we have this word teenagers, all of this is just modern American thinking. But it's good to be aware of it, and I would say to talk about it as parents, which is one of the things. I think where to start is to, as much as you can, get aligned as parents on this type of thinking.
Yeah, parents have got to get on the same page. Moms and dads have got to get on the same page. And this is where I think we can appreciate some of the complementarity in God's design, that both men and women together image God, and we need one another, and moms and dads need one another. Males and females need one another because we have certain tendencies, certain propensities that are different from one another. And this is where, and this is, I think, where we can help each other see the, I don't know if I want to say weaknesses, if that's the right word. I mean, I think in humility, I would want to say weaknesses, because I think there are some weaknesses to a male-only perspective, especially applied to children.
Mm-hmm.
And there are weaknesses to a female-only perspective applied to children. And I don't think we should shy away from saying that, because it should lead us to be a little more humble with one another, and to listen to one another well, and to figure out how do we come together, complement one another, collaborate, partner together in the raising of the next generation.
Yeah, and I think this is where thinking about our differences as men and women and our tendencies, of course, that this doesn't, it's not always that mom's the more nurturing one. But it tends to be that mom tends towards nurturing, dad tends towards risk taking, and so dad will most likely be the one that's pushing the kid to get out there and grow up and that sort of thing.
Well, in that illustration I gave earlier, it was the dad who seemed to be more enabling and not pushing the kid, and it was the mom who was wanting to push more.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and that's what I was going to say. So there's the awareness of how we are different as men and women, but also the awareness of personality wise and how we'll be different, but also, and I think this is even bigger maybe than how we are different as men and women. I don't know, but it's our family of origin and what we bring, like how we think about launching kids is so much influenced by how probably our parents launched us, and whether we liked the way they launched us or thought it was good, thought it was bad. And so we bring all this stuff into our parenting, of course. And so that's why the first place to start in thinking about helping your child to become an adult is, as parents, thinking about what kind of baggage do I bring to this? What do I seem to have good intuition on? But also maybe I do have wrong thinking about it. Maybe I have these ideas, or maybe just, I mean, you and I grew up in similar type homes, like both parents, Christian homes, but our families were quite different in how they did things. And so we'll just think the way our family did it a lot of times is normal, and that's how we should do it.
Although, as you say that, probably one place where our families were pretty aligned was in the idea of kind of responsibility in adulthood. Because I think we're very similar in our views there. And in fact, so I think that might be a good place to start for us as parents, is to say, hey, what is adulthood?
Mhm.
What does it mean for my kid to become an adult? And when does that happen?
Yeah.
Or when there's going to be maybe some transition, but when should I kind of expect adult things from them?
Yes.
That's probably where we should start. And so how we think about our kids is important. This is where we've done some things in our own home, and I don't know how effective they were. I don't know if our kids ever liked it, but we would try to, we try to make the word teenager a bad word. Like I would not allow the kids to refer themselves as teens or teenager. And, and the kids probably, I'm sure they rolled their eyes plenty of times on that one. But the idea in the serious moments with that, I would tell the kids, you're not a teenager, you're a young adult. And that was to help do, I think, a couple of things: raise the bar of expectation for them, but also help them to see that there's this modern category that we don't necessarily have to accept.
Mhm.
That there's this stage now between being a little child. Now there's this thing called adolescence, or being a teen. And it comes with a set of cultural expectations. And we wanted to fight against that because what we see in the culture is low expectations for kids and for teenagers. And we wanted to raise the expectations. So that was just one of the ways to try to communicate to them our vision of adulthood, is that you're a young adult. Okay, we'll make a distinction between adult and young adults, but I don't want to just put you into the teen category because I think that comes with cultural baggage.
Yeah.
The cultural baggage of low expectations.
Yeah.
So that's the first part. And that might just be, it's just a lot of conversation.
Yeah. And I think if you grew up quite differently from your spouse, or maybe your ex-spouse, if you've split up, or blended families, whatever, that you might, especially if you grew up very differently, you might just need to say, we're going to need help in this. And actually, we probably all should just say, you know what, we're going to need help in this, because this whole topic of, okay, what do we think about adulthood? When should they be capable of doing things on their own? You're probably going to need help with that. And this, again, we beat on this drum a lot because it's reality. This is where the local church is so vital in your life. Because if you have some older couples who are just further down the journey than you, but have launched kids, and from what you can tell, have done it in a healthy way, you need those people in your life, and you need them to, you just need to say, can we buy you dinner? And can you help us navigate this? Because this is coming, or we're in it now. We have a 24-year-old who's not moving out. We need help.
Yeah, because they're coming from, in some senses, a different culture, a different time and era.
Yeah.
So they're able to see things in this culture that those of us who have grown up in it or are swimming in it constantly don't get to see.
Yeah.
Okay, so starting with your view, really defining what an adult is, looking at that biblically, what seems to be marks of maturity, and so having that vision. Now, I think one thing we want to focus on with this conversation is that adulthood seems to entail responsibility. You take responsibility for yourself. And we could cash this out in a lot of different ways. It would be taking responsibility for your actions, owning it. It would be taking responsibility to provide for yourself. So there's a lot of ways we could cash this out, but that just seems to be kind of a universal recognition of something that is true. Adults take responsibility. That's where we want to get our kids. And so let's focus on the responsibility piece, because I think that's a big piece.
Yes.
And there are helpful markers in the culture to kind of think about, okay, when should they take responsibility for themselves? And so, 16 is an age where there's culturally, this might be helpful. Getting your driver's license. Well, of course, if you're going to put a 16-year-old behind the wheel of a 3,000-pound metal machine, they're you're going to need some responsibility.
You're going to need prayer.
They're going to, those kids are going to need to have some responsibility before we do that.
Yeah.
And that's probably why we see a lot of delaying of that, because we haven't gotten our kids to be in a place where we're a little more comfortable with that.
Yeah, where they're responsible for anything. We're
Yeah.
still doing their laundry, packing their lunches, making sure they wake up on time. We are still doing everything for them. So then they turn 16 and legally they're allowed to drive. And mom and dad or both are thinking there's no way they're ready for this. And you're probably right, but it's not because they aren't capable of it.
Yeah.
It's because we haven't been letting go, pushing them to be responsible for it. Starts with the little things.
Yeah.
Like I said, with the 2-year-old of getting themselves dressed. And then you keep growing with them. And so, yeah, there's no question
that cultural marker was helpful for us, because we wanted, so our goal as well for our kids was that they are driving by 16.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, is just helpful to us as a family, especially a
Yes.
family of 7, to have extra drivers. But number two, knowing it would require a certain amount of responsibility, and we'd wanted them to be at that level by the time they got there.
Mm-hmm.
So that cultural marker was helpful. Then you've got 18, and now you vote.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a communication of, hey, you're responsible enough to now vote for the leaders of our country.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we kind of made a big deal of that with our kids, that you get to vote. And when you're 18, we're going to go together and vote together, because that's a kind of a cultural marker that has traditionally signaled responsibility. And so using that as a helpful cultural marker. 21, right? 21 is a legal drinking age. And so to share, your first glass of wine with your kid at 21 is to, I think, communicate, hey, there's a responsibility. Now you can live with this thing that God has provided in a responsible, way, in a grown up way, in a mature way. So those cultural markers have been helpful in the past. I think for some of us though, we haven't let that, I think, inform us at all. But so I think another cultural marker is kind of growing up and then graduating from like high school, again, around 18. And I think what that can do is set for us maybe a time frame. Like by the time your kid graduates from high school, by the time they're 18, they should be moving towards taking responsibility, because that is entailed by adulthood. And so moving into adulthood. All right. So if that's kind of the framework that we're working with, okay, how do we get them to be responsible? And I think this is where let's get practical, real practical, Erin, on this. All right. How do we do that? How do we help them not to fail to launch? How do we, what do we do? Let's say you've got your 19-year-old or 18 or 19-year-old. They've graduated from high school and they're living at home. Okay, what are some of your thoughts on what they should be doing?
Well, I think, so I'm thinking about how we've done it, which is by the time you get to this point, expectations are clear. But I think that a big part of this is setting expectations. So when they're in high school, you're talking about, this is coming up that you are going to be on your own. And you're not talking about it in a begrudging
we can't
way.
Wait for you to get out of here. Although there may have been one or two kids we kind of took that approach with.
And it's okay if it does, like you mentioned, Brett. I mean, we joke about you being heartless, but you really did.
But it's true.
You really did. You're getting choked up thinking about our 17-year-old, almost 18-year-old who's about to launch. And so that's not what I mean, that we're just like unfeeling about it, but that we're communicating, this is coming And we want to make sure you're ready for it
Yeah.
because we know you're capable of it.
Yeah.
And so by the time they're 19 living at home, if they're still living at home, it should be only under an agreed upon family arrangement because we know they're capable of being on their own.
Yeah.
So if they're still at home, it would be, in our case, it's been because they're either full-time in school or full-time working towards launching.
Yeah.
But it's not just this like, hey, you can stay around forever. It's like, no, you want to be an adult. We want you to be an adult. If you're working towards that, we're happy to give you a few more years to save up money or go to school and study so that you're prepared for a career or something that you're wanting to do. And so that has to be the framework, the mindset, again, that parents are in agreement on, but also that your kid knows, like, oh, this is for a time, and it's only under the circumstance that they're basically helping me to have the advantage of not having to necessarily pay for everything in my life, but I'm working towards paying for everything. I'm working towards being a responsible person. And so it's that. So that's part of it. If they're still at home, it's under the understanding that this is for a time and that they're working towards something. And then it's also with the understanding that whoever lives in the home contributes to the home. And so if you're still living at home at 20 because you're working full time and saving, or in school and home on Christmas break or home during the summer, if you're here living here, and even if you're paying a little bit of rent with your parents or whatever it is, and we've done different things for different kids depending on the circumstance, but you're contributing to the home.
Yeah.
You're not just you're not still 5, you're 19. And so everybody who lives here contributes.
Yeah. Okay. So I think here's what we need to do on this conversation. I think we need to pause, because I think what we've been doing here is really, like we do a lot, is framing this issue, thinking carefully about this issue, trying to identify the cultural pressures and influences us, the things that influence us. And then also kind of sketching out, biblically, what do we think, and what is biblical guidance and wisdom on this? So we have a lot of practical ideas, and we're going to need to do that in the next episode, because I think that will be where will really be helpful in fleshing out
the framework.
What does this look like? So we will list out a lot of practical things to help our kids become adults, in the next episode on this. And there are some very, very practical and, I guess, actionable items that we can do as parents that will help our kids. And in all of it, we want to really celebrate this goal of helping our kids to become Christian adults, who then can go out into this world, enjoy God's good world, do productive things, live out the cultural commission and the Great Commission, love God, love others, and they can be salt and light in the culture by becoming an adult. MAVEN exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. Through your generous financial partnership with MAVEN, you are having an impact on the lives of students and families across the country. To become a monthly partner, visit maventruth.com and click on the donate button.